This is the New York Police Department's Bomb Squad. Part human, part dog, part robot, all one team.
Lethal and indiscriminate. To disarm one is to save countless lives.
NYPD Bomb Squad has given the all clear.
One reason the members of the oldest and biggest bomb squad in the United States are unique.
Bomb Squad was able to safely remove a device.
When you don't see them, the NYPD Bomb Squad is always watching for that unsuspecting threat.
NYPD Bomb Squad racing in, then hauling away another suspicious package.
Package has been properly identified.
You're listening to Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's Arson Explosion and Bomb Squad. I love that theme. It's a new theme. Well, I rolled out different ones for all my different miniseries. Like I said on previous episodes, there's one for the FDNY miniseries, one for ESU, one for Hostage, and that one is for the Arson Explosion and Bomb Squad one. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode 171 of the Mike the New Haven podcast. We are on the march to episode 200, which we should hit later this summer after hitting 100 last September. If you haven't checked out the previous episode, that was a bonus episode because I originally had something else on Friday, so I didn't record an actual show that day, but I recorded a surprise show on Monday that was released on Friday with former DEA and ATF agent Lou Diaz. Lou is best known for being the man that brought down Mr. Untouchable himself, Nicky Barnes, and his counsel in the 1970s. So you want to hear that episode to hear Lou's story. So it's Boom Room week this week on the Mike the New Haven podcast. Tales from the Boom Room, that is, volumes 21 and 22. You're going to get Eddie Hayes from the Bomb Squad on Friday, but tonight you get my next guest. The NYPD's Detective Bureau is an all-encompassing treasure trove of opportunities, and for 16 of his 20 years on the job, he was firmly planted in it. Coming on the job in 1985, he worked in the heart of the city in Midtown for the first 6 years of his career before a 1991 promotion to sergeant saw him search for the lost souls of the big city as a member of the Missing Persons Squad. In March of 1997, he morphed into a fire cop, venturing on over to the Arson Explosion Squad, where he rounded out an exciting career in 2005 for Volume 21 of Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's Arson Explosion and Bomb Squad, is retired NYPD Arson Explosion Sergeant Fred Manzolillo. Fred, welcome. How are you?
Thank you, and thank you for that very gracious introduction. Thank you. I'm blushing if you can't tell.
No, you're quite welcome. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So the first question is always an easy one that I ask my guests. The early years, where'd you grow up?
Well, I was born in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, and I was raised in Queens, Flushing, which right outside the World's Fair. Mm-hmm. So in a much long ago time, College Point Boulevard actually was called Rodman Street. We got off of the Long Island Expressway, which doesn't exist, and you know, the World's Fair was my backyard. My older brother and I used to play in there before they destroyed it by building the World's Fair again. So, you know, had great memories there.
Do they still have that? Because I haven't heard about the World's Fair in such a long time. Is it still held?
No, I never. I know they tried to do something up in Montreal one time. They called it the Expose or something, and I think they did another one out in St. Louis to replicate one that was there in the early years also. But I don't hear of anything like that anymore.
What was it, like a circus?
No. The World's Fair was more of, how do you know, they had different international themes. They had history, future. I mean, the Hall of Science in Queens is still the building that was used in the World's Fair. And the one of the displays is, and this is 1964. They had the space shuttle going across the top in the theater at the final, before you exited the building. You sat through a little movie, and they were saying the future, and there was the space shuttle going across the ceiling. So, you know, that's what type of events that were held there too, as well as, you know, you had promotions for, like, Goodyear Tire had a pavilion, The Singer Bowl was actually, Singer, like sewing machines and stuff.
Right.
GE was big with that.
General Electric.
Yep. As a matter of fact, at Disney World now, the GE Pavilion had a play, It's a Small World. And that ride that's in Disney World actually came from the World's Fair.
So it's all encompassing. It makes sense that you would call it the World's Fair because it had a little bit of everything.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And there you go.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, Belgian waffles made their debut in New York at the World's Fair.
Yeah.
And the guys that actually ran the store in the Belgium Village in the World's Fair actually rented my parents' basement during the World's Fair. So they used
to make me hungry now.
Yeah, well, matter of fact, we had a watchdog. My father had a watchdog, and they would come home with like some waffles and try to bribe the dogs, because the dog, no matter how many times a day that they try to get friendly with the dog was still going to bark at them. So they tried to bribe the dog with waffles. My father says the dog really likes it with whipped cream and cherries on it.
Oh boy! If you have a question for Fred tonight in the chat, please submit it. I do actually. My friend Mike Milner from FDNY Retired Rescue 4. Just a quick sidebar here. He makes a note of this, and thank you, Mike, for bringing this up. Just a reminder: on this day, 168 people died at the Oklahoma City bombing at the Murray Building. It was April 19th, 1995, and this was the first deployment of the NYC USAR team with PD and FD helped bring the end of the battle to badges. Thank you, Mike, for bringing that up. I actually slipped my mind that today is that anniversary, and that's my mistake on that part. So thank you, Mike. I appreciate you mentioning that. You don't want to forget those 168 people. So I guess, that was it transitions perfectly, because that was a form of service that USAR, the FEMA team, showed down there in Oklahoma City. And obviously 20 years of your career was spent in regards to service to the city of New York. Did you always want to go into civil service, or was it a happy accident for you?
Well, actually, I've been blessed with two vocations in life. And, when I was a little boy, though, I did want to be a cop, because during the World's Fair, there was a traffic cop assigned to Gate 7 on Rodman Street, which is College Point Boulevard. Officer Frank, I used to call him. And Officer Frank would let me direct traffic every once in a while with him. And, I was always fascinated with it. And one of my uncles, he was a housing cop. And, I would listen to his stories, and I was always interested in it. But leading to my main vocation was, my father was a funeral director, and I followed in his footsteps out of high school and became a licensed funeral director in the city. And I worked, most of my life doing it. And I was actually managing a funeral home for 8 years before I left to become a cop. So, I was very fortunate that I picked two careers that were like recession proof.
Yeah, well, yeah, that is true. That is true. When you put it that way. And I'll ask you, going through the academy, coming on to the job, I know this is speeding ahead a little bit, and then we'll backtrack some to the beginning. But that first homicide scene, or not even homicide, just death scene, could be somebody for natural causes, could be unfortunately a suicide, or whatever the case may be. I imagine, given those 8 years you spent in the funeral home, it didn't faze you much compared to other guys.
Well, it was longer than 8 years in a funeral home, so I grew up in it. So, I mean, it was just second nature to me to be around DOAs, and yes, you have feelings and everything, but you know how to control them. I knew how to, to work with the medical examiner's office, which came into play in my career. But on the job, my first DOA, was just, I got to see it before I saw it on the front page of a newspaper, because it was, a homicide in the subway system in Times Square on Christmas Day. It was on Christmas Day.
Not great.
Heavy, so. Other DOAs that that I saw was, first, as the steam was still coming out of the bullet hole, a bank guard in Midtown Manhattan, God bless him, he's a retired cop, and he was working for Apple Bank, and he actually got involved in a shootout with a guy that came in to hold up the bank, and right where the subway stairs were outside the bank, that's where the perp was running, and he took one last shot at the guard, and the guard was able to fire back, and he hit him, and right between the eyes.
Oh, wow!
And he was. By the time my partner and I got out of the car, the guy was actually still vibrating on the floor, flapping around like a fish. You knew he was dead, but he just didn't die yet. We waited for EMS to come, and by that time he had expired. So there was nothing else that we could do, and that poor guy, as I was talking to him, went his whole career without ever having to get into gunplay, and here he is working after retirement, and he gets in a shootout and has to kill someone, and he has to live with that now.
It's I don't mean to laugh because it's not a funny story, even though the outcome, we're glad the guard survived and the other person didn't, because it wasn't like they had the best of intentions. Law and Order, the original Law and Order, which just came back, by the way, for a new season, which I'm happy about. It's ripped from the headlines. In the beginning of an episode, like in 95, I remember watching this in the reruns. There's a scene where at a clinic, some woman is going berserk and she pulls out a gun and she shoots at her husband. And the guard there is a retired cop who has, unfortunately, to shoot her and kill her. And he says to Lenny Briscoe at the scene, 20 years in the 2-7, which was the fictional precinct in Law and Order, never once had to pull my piece. And Lenny's retort was, the late, great Jerry Orbach, of course, who says retirement's boring. So It might have been based on that shootout that you responded to. Who knows? Could have been.
Yeah, no, it's not the first time guys had encountered that. So
no, of course. So starting out, I mean, you had the background in the funeral home. Obviously, your uncle was a housing cop, but you didn't go to housing. You obviously didn't go to transit. You got the city. And I imagine that, especially where you worked the first 6 years of your career, nothing against housing or transit, you had to be relieved that it was the city, because you got to explore and expand your abilities and do so much early on.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I always said about NYPD, if you ever, get in that, a rut because you say the same old thing day after day after day, some people aren't cut out for that. They like to change. The department, I don't know how many units totally, but it's well over 100 different units that you could go to. Mm-hmm. You could stay in patrol, but then you could go into, all the specialty units that patrol offers. You get into the detective bureau, you get into, building maintenance if you wanted to. But, you could do things like that. And every, few years you want to move around. It's like starting a whole new career again and refreshes yourself. So that's a good thing and good aspect of the police department.
So you were in, and I wish that the NYPD would bring this back. Logistically, I don't know if it's possible, but I felt it was such a great thing. And hearing the guys describe it back then, and the gals too, the NSU, the Neighborhood Stabilization Unit, where you really learned and found your footing. And I see the smile on your face, so I know it brings back fond memories. You really learned how to be a cop. You had a field training officer. You got to really have trial by fire, where you're out in the field and you get to make an impact right away, but you get to refine it, kind of like sculpting, if you will. It's not perfect, but it's beginning to take shape. NSU 3 was around, I believe, the Midtown Manhattan area, if I'm not mistaken.
It was Midtown South, Midtown North, and the 17th precinct. Mm. And we, at my year, my time there, we were turning out of Midtown South precinct. Mm-hmm. So generally, we were, just in the Midtown area. The 17th, every once in a while, you would have to cover a post there. But most of the time, you were either in the South or the North. Mm. And don't get misled where they did away with the NSU. They still have training going on in the precinct that you're assigned in.
Sure, yes.
So they don't just turn them out like that, but I'm sure they're going to have their stories in their day too.
No, of course.
Depending on the person, but I came on the job late in my life compared to the average of my academy class. In July of '85, there was 1,400 recruits sworn in. The average age probably was less than 23 or 24. I was approaching my 29th birthday, and I took the job, because of the benefits that it offered over the funeral home. I was working for someone. I knew that, let's face it, I was married at the time. I was having a baby. I just bought a house. I did a lot of things, and I wanted to have the security of a retirement package and health plan, which they offered. The pay, I took a cut in pay to work there, but I had to make do, and that, again, in the academy, there is no overtime,
Right.
unless you have a catastrophic event like what happened on 9/11, but there is no overtime. And then when you get out, in NSU, you're still learning the ropes, but then you start finding out there was a very important piece of paper that they taught about in the academy. It was, about a 3.5 by 9-inch long, and it was called overtime slip. And you make overtime. So I made up the shortfall with overtime whenever I could.
This is Sergeant Fred Manzolillo here at the Mike the New Haven podcast. This is volume 21 of Tales from the Boom Room, Profiles of the NYPD's Arson Explosion and Bomb Squad. And, working back then, and you spent the first, like I said, 6 years in Midtown, but particularly from 86 to 89 in Midtown South, there's always the collars and there's the paper. Sometimes you make the paper for good stuff, but if you can avoid it, especially these days, you don't really want to be in the paper because there's so much going on, and it's easy for a crime reporter or some photographer or some buff to get his kicks by photographing the FDNY and NYPD in these locales. So for you, what helped you, I guess, for lack of a better way to ask the question, avoid the news, the Times, Newsday, and the like, and the Post too?
Well, I wasn't one of those type of persons that would, look for the glamour. I knew that I had a job to do. I didn't need anyone alongside of me. When you talk about Midtown, Midtown South always got inundated with ride-alongs. We had, every screenwriter in Hollywood wanted to ride in the back of a radio car for whatever reason. And I remember I just was assigned there. I was working with a 15-year veteran. His partner was on vacation. Paul Zerlnick, he liked me because I was an older guy. He knew I wasn't a rookie. And, I was well versed in Manhattan work environment. So he says, "No, if you don't mind, ride with me tonight." I says, "Yeah." And then all of a sudden we get called to the desk, and we have this guy riding around with us, who's two guys, who they were screenwriters for Rambo. So we didn't pull more than 200 feet away from the station house when Paulie put the car in park, turned around and told them it would be best that you just stay in the back of the car, because the only person in this car that I care about is him, and the only person in the car that he cares about is me. So when we get to someplace, I would just suggest you stay out of the way. So naturally, yeah. And they were getting out of the car on the routine stuff. But we get a gun run in one of the theaters on 42nd Street, the famous Deuce.
Right.
And sure enough, we pull up by the theater. These guys bolted out and ran into the theater. And I go to Paulie, I says, "We'll find out who has the gun now." They just ran right in ahead of all of us, but they wanted to get in there. And before, you were talking about with me privately before the show, DCPIs and everything. and he's a deputy commissioner now, and does a lot of public speaking. But he was the DCPI for quite a while. John Miller.
Yes, friend of mine, been on the show. Yep.
Yeah, well, I remember when he was a young reporter out in the street, and he answered a radio run at the Martinique Hotel, Midtown Manhattan. It was a welfare hotel at the time. I think it was the second largest welfare hotel in the city. So it's a tremendous building, and anything could go. And this was on a day tour, which was, usually the 4 to 12, you really hop in there. Day tour, you had your problems too. And you had a foot post that was assigned there permanently. But they were there just to take reports. But if there was a call in the building like this, they waited for a radio car to show up. They needed backup to go up there. So there we are, 3 of us in the elevator. And who comes running in but a guy in plain clothes? And he's carrying a radio that didn't look like the radio I was carrying. So I held the door open. I went like this. As he jumped in, but I held the door from shutting. I says, "Who are you?" And he goes, "Well, I'm John Miller." I says, "Okay, John Miller from where? Because you don't work with me." He goes, I think at the time he was with NBC.
He was, yeah, he was.
He was with NBC. I pushed him right out of the elevator. You're not riding this elevator with us. Get off. And as usual, it was like nothing found. It was an unfounded job. But you can't take the chance. Imagine us having a guy come up there with us and he gets hurt.
Right, or worse. But that was John, because back then, I remember Scotty Wagner telling me this, and John confirmed it when he was on the show for episode 100, because he was my 100th show back in September last year. He got this really old police car, and he took out they had taken out all the old police equipment, the radios and everything. He got it all back and put it back in. And he would follow these guys around on jobs to where, my friend Scotty, I always tell this story because it's a great story. Scotty was a housing detective at the time. He sees John pull up and he's like, "John, can we ride around in your car? Because it's a heck of a lot nicer than the crap that we got." So, that's John in a nutshell, and, it led to a lot of great stories for him and a lot of great stories for the people he interacted with. And I do want to go back to a couple of things. You thought that you were the oldest guy to come on the job on this show. You missed the record by 3 years. I was going to say Richie Teamsma has the record on this show. He was 32 when he came on the job. Yeah, in 1982. So Richie Teamsma holds the record for now, but you almost had him. You came in second. The other thing is, working early on, our mutual friend Jerry Kane, who's a card, and I mean that in the best way possible. You had an interesting story about him that you were beginning to tell me off the air. I didn't want you to tell me off the air because I wanted you to tell me now. So what is it?
Well, when we went through the academy, and we get our assignments, and I went to NSU 3, and in NSU 3 we had he was a great guy. Lieutenant McDonald was the commanding officer at NSU 3. Mm-hmm. He had plenty of time on a job and had a great sense of humor. So, he asked for volunteers to work a special shift in this NSU that they had, and it was called the 6 to 2 shift. So 6 at night until 2 in the morning, and it was a Tuesday through Saturday calendar. So you didn't work the chart like the other squads would work a day tour and then a week of evening tours. They would flip flop, but they would rotate their days off also. So not too many hands went up and volunteered for the 6 to 2.
I imagine.
So naturally, Lieutenant McDonald had to start doing the lotto, and I couldn't even win that bingo. And sure enough, I'm like the first ticket out is me. Mm-hmm. So with me, there was a couple of guys that actually were in my company at the academy, and they go, "Well, if you're going, we're going to go too." So they volunteered right after me, and then Jerry got picked. And I think maybe he was one of the guys that volunteered to do it. But the story with Jerry is one evening, we were just finishing up our tour of duty. It was a rainy February night. It was cold. And we were wearing the rubbers. I mean, you had your rain gear on. I was working on 8th Avenue between 42nd Street and 40th Street, right by the bus terminal. And there was another guy that was working a post across the street, but at the time there was like an influx of crime down in the subway, so they wanted us to do subway booth checks. You go down to the subway, make sure that the person in the booth was okay, write down the booth number in your memo book that you were there, what time, and you come up. So right before the end of the tour, before we were heading back to the station house, me and him decided to go check 42nd and 8th. We come back up one staircase, and we're inside the Port Authority terminal, but there's another subway entrance right there also. And there's a guy getting mugged right there. And all of a sudden, the bad guy sees us and takes off, and he's flying down 42nd Street. Now, it's not raining. It stopped raining. And there's me and Joe Mastroda, that was the other cop I was with. We're running down 42nd Street, and I see that there was a radio car by 9th Avenue, on 42nd Street by 9th Avenue. I had to wait until between the two Port Authority buildings is a breezeway for the buses to go through. So I had to wait to see if this guy was going to pass the breezeway or go towards 9th Avenue. And he did. And I got on a radio and I told him, I said, the radio car 4219, we want that guy. And it was something out of a Hollywood scene where the car door opens up and takes the guy out. And we... And we catch the guy, right, and collar him up, make the collar, and all of a sudden, as the guy's handcuffed, and there's a couple other posts there, a couple of radio cars because they heard there was a chase. A city bus going westbound on 42nd Street comes screeching to a halt right across the street from us, and who jumps off the bus but Jerry Kane? And Jerry was all the way down by the public library on 5th Avenue, heard the radio call that we were in pursuit, commandeered the bus, and told the guy to keep on going.
You're kidding.
We had 2 months on the job. I said, you took over a city bus? I said, Jerry, I didn't know I meant that much to you.
That sounds like something he would do. That's something straight out of the French Connection. Why not? I mean, that's he. And Jerry, I know he's watching. So, or if he doesn't watch now, I know he'll watch the replay. Jerry, I'm mad at you because you didn't tell me that story. He did not tell me that story when he was on. So, Jerry, I got some beef with you now.
That was a precious moment.
It's like such straight out of police business, and then to get a whole bus. My God! But hey, listen.
You got there, though. You got there.
He got there. That's dedication. That's dedication. You can't get mad at a guy for that.
And Jerry and I are still friends to this day. So,
of course.
We when we get to in his busy schedule and my very relaxed schedule, whenever I'm up in the New York area and he's around, at a function, we get to see each other. But that's about it. Or talk online or things like that.
Right. When I see him, I think of a line my old buddy, my good buddy Dan McNally from the Bomb Squad told me one time when he was on this show, in which he was saying, retirement's a tough business. It's a hard thing to do, and Jerry lives that because I think he's busier now in retirement. He's been out the job now 17 years than he was when he was on the job. Yeah. But good for him.
Yeah. No, it was, that's one of the reasons why I went on was that there was a retirement. Yeah. Right now, if I was in the funeral business, I still be, in that business, working my butt off, trying to make a living, Right. But I knew that at least with the police department, I had a retirement with a pension, with the health, and I said that's one of the primary reasons I went on.
So you had a bump in pay early on in your career. And Peter Pranzo was watching. Lieutenant Peter Pranzo, he says, Jerry's a gent. Hey, Pete, and Raquel, his better half, is watching. As always, loyal viewers of the show. You got to bump up in pay because back then, you could take the sergeant's test pretty early. I remember talking about this with Jerry, with my good friend Bill Cannon. Guys became sergeants with 4 or 5 years in the job. Nothing wrong with that. If you could take the test and get that promotion, hey, take it. And you did. I imagine it wasn't just the pay, although that's not a bad bonus to have. What other factors were at play for you to decide to study up, take that test, and fortunately for you, wind up passing it?
Well, there was a guy in my neighborhood who was, he was on a job, and his brother was, was my age, and I hung out with. I remember sitting in a bar one night, and we were talking over beers, and he says one of the keys that you'll have to try to remember this. He says the police department is like a pyramid, and you don't want to be on the bottom. He was a detective. He goes, be a detective or take a test. He says, be one or the other, but this way, you're not on that bottom layer. And when the test came around, and you got to understand, they were so short of sergeants back then because they didn't give a promotion test since '83, I believe. 82 or 83 was the last sergeant's test given. 88 was the next one, and I took the 88 test. And by the time they got done crunching numbers and everything, a whole new contract was negotiated.
Wow.
And I was in, I guess, the first group, or one of the first groups under the new contract. So that big bump in pay we didn't get. We got less than half of what we should have gotten. And it was all because of the president of the SBA that at that time took the easy route, and because the PBA in the '88 contract, they sold out their unborn, as we used to say about that '88 contract. Anyone who wasn't a cop that wanted to be a cop, their pay scale was going to get stretched out. And then this president of the SBA decided to do the same thing to guys who were already cops. We already went through a stretch out to get to our top pay as a cop. He sold out unborn sergeants. And he says, how could you do that? I could tell you in my BMOD class, which is the instructional portion when you first get promoted, in those days, you went to the police academy. The 666, Jerry. I remember 666. That was part of it. Right. We had to go to the police academy for like 4 weeks, and the president of the SBA comes in there to congratulate us, and he's there talking about how great it is, and he was taking questions, and guys were not really paying attention to what he says. And there was 100 guys. They were so short sergeants. They promoted 100 of us, and we're sitting there, and then at the very end, I raised my hand. I asked the one question. I asked him how he had the nerve to stand on that stage in front of us when everyone in this room lost $14,000 because of his negotiations on the contract.
Or lack thereof.
And there you go, lack of. And you know how guys, when they're not paying attention, they're reading the Daily News, the New York Post, and talking to their neighbor, having a cup of coffee. All of a sudden, when I mentioned that key word, $14,000, the newspapers went down. The lids went on the coffee. Everyone turned quiet. And all I saw was an ocean of people figuring out on their fingers how much money they really did lose. And the next thing you saw were newspapers being thrown at the president of the SBA and taken off the stage. I said, how does this guy come in here? And not only that, he took away 3 personal days of ours. I said, we lost 3 chart days. It was just a terrible, terrible period. And don't you think I got the chart days, I think, back after I already went through the stretch out. The stretch out. And the stretch out, they ended that stretch out just as we ended our, we came to the last increment on our stretch out. The new board was able to renegotiate it and get it back for the fellas better. But terrible. He was a terrible negotiator, terrible contract to work with. Jerry's right. We that 88 contract with that stretch out, we gave up control of our variable supplement fund to the city. There was a report. It was this, I believe it was the Zarconi report study, and the biggest fault they found for corruption in our police department was the fact that we were one of the lowest paid big city police departments in the country. He says, you're not paying you guys enough money. I mean, you go out to Nassau County, Suffolk County,
I was going to say that.
Jersey City.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the parity wasn't there. And, they said, you got to give these guys raises. We're all clicking our heels saying, finally, we were working, without a contract for 3 years. And we're all figuring, at least 10, 10, and 10. And then all of a sudden, you had in 1988, you had one of the biggest retirement years because it was the biggest hiring year in 1968. All these guys wanted to get out, and they just wanted a contract that just, whatever could inflate those 3 years of numbers. And there's a thing that we have, it's called a variable supplement fund that we controlled as a union. And the city wanted that money. They wanted to have control of it. They wanted to be able to use it and make money themselves with it. We're talking $500 million. And well, for one reason or another, we're only speculating that it was just coincidentally that the PBA attorney was arrested shortly before the contract was settled.
Purely coincidental.
Just coincidental. And we accepted 6, 6, and 6, and we gave up control of our variable supplement fund, which every year we have to, you always scratch your head. You know that it's supposed to be guaranteed, but now you have someone else controlling it that you have no power over, and you just hope that goes on, because that was an incentive, because we were getting a lot less money. The other agencies that I mentioned, their retirement packages were unbelievable, compared to ours. So, but anyway, that's something about union stuff.
Imagine the play-by-play of that negotiation. Swing and a miss, he struck him out. So pretty much what went down there. That's how you could summarize it. So you did spend a year from 91 and 92 in the 112 out in Queens, and nothing against that. I'm sure it was an interesting stop, but you had not one but two separate stints, and you had a stint in IAB too, which I'll get to in a moment. But you had one. But two, and not one, but two, I should say, stints in missing persons. And your first time in missing persons was originally 89 to 91, which is where you were originally a sergeant in. So this is a city of 8 million people. Sometimes these missing persons reports are people, that it's a family dispute. They ran away for a little bit, but it's not legitimate. They're back within a few hours and everything's fine. Sometimes they're legitimate missing people, like we kind of saw with the whole Gabby Petito thing a little while ago, where the families are adamant, no, I know this person. They would not do this.
Yeah.
How do you differentiate what's a real, no, this is a legitimate missing person versus, this is just a family dispute and it's not as urgent?
Well, just to be clear about something, I didn't get into that portion of it until I came back as a sergeant. Mm-hmm. But when I was sent there as a cop from Midtown South Precinct.
Oh, right.
Okay. It was one of the few and rare moments that the job, NYPD, actually did something sensible with what actually makes sense. But they took a person like myself who put in the application. They had an opening in their missing person squad medical examiner's unit that was going to be assigned at the chief ME's office and be a liaison homicide person for all the Manhattan. For me, I was the liaison person for all the Manhattan precincts that had homicides. So what we did was we would get the information about the homicide that took place that the medical examiner was going to examine that morning. And so I would get there early. I would call around. There should be reports waiting for me. I could tell the ME that, we have witnesses that say this happened, that happened, and let them actually try and find evidence that could either prove it or disprove it. So I was doing that. Plus, I was on the sergeant's promotion list. So I knew that this was an opportunity for me. I really didn't want to leave Midtown South. I had a great partner there, Charlie Talamo. and we worked for a couple of years in a radio car together. Funniest times in those 3 years will always be the funniest period in my life. Is because of that guy, and making the decision to leave. He's the one that booted me. He says, "You got to go. You're going to get promoted, and you'll never get to the detective bureau." As a sergeant, it's hard to get there as a cop. Never mind as a sergeant. So, I says, "Well, you're right. Let me take this." It was an opportunity. It came calling, and I did it. And, no regrets. I got promoted while I was there. And while I was there, I worked with some very talented people for the jobs that we had to do. We had a boss, Jack Hackett. During
what a name. That's a cop name I ever heard of. One, Jack Hackett.
And Jack, Jack was a licensed funeral director too. But they knew that I came from working in the business my entire life. So one of the things in my interview was, could I fingerprint the DOA? Are you going to get squeamish about it? There's some guys that they talk the talk. Now you got to walk the walk. Me, I could walk into the autopsy room and talk to the doctor as I'm doing it. So it was no big deal. So he put me into the squad, and I was there. In September of August of '89, and a few weeks later, an airplane went off the runway of LaGuardia Airport, U.S.
Flight 5050.
5050.
Yeah.
You had a good memory there, Mike. I applaud you for that. There were 2 fatalities on that flight, and just to give you the backdrop of that is that I had banged out a day that particular day. I had called in to take a vacation day because I wasn't feeling good. I had a fever. I didn't go sick because I was going to start my days off the next day. I figured, why go out sick and go through all that trouble of going down to the medical division and all that. Well, anyway. I get called in. I had to report to the Port Authority police hangar in LaGuardia Airport. And Mark Giffen, who we came on the job together, Jerry and I worked with him in Midtown South precinct with him. He went to missing persons before me. He was a licensed funeral director. He's the one that told me about the opening, and I put in for the position. So me and him were partnered up there, and we're at the hangar. And they pull another body up into the hangar. We have these 2 ladies. One was older than the other, and then they pull up another body. And Mark and I look at them, and Chief of Detectives was standing there. His name at the time was Coangelo.
Joe Borelli.
No.
Joe Borelli. Oh, okay.
No, Coangelo was the Chief of Detectives, and he's standing there. The division CO at the time was a guy named Dugan, Inspector Dugan, and he's standing there with our missing persons CO. And Dr. Charles Hirsch, very learned individual, gratitude for showing me things and how forensic investigations of wounds, knife wounds, gunshot wounds, blunt trauma wounds. He would love to teach you, love to show you, what to look for. Not that he wanted you to be a doctor; he just loved to teach. But he just took the job as the ME. He came from Suffolk County, and he didn't want a whole lot of people around these bodies. He wanted us only people that he directed to be touching the bodies while he did the examination right there. We were trying to identify them and stuff. And there was a whole bunch of other guys, crime scene guys, ESU guys, everyone is there. And he just said, I just need this place cleared out because I just want certain people here. He says, Mark and Fred, if you could stay. So Coangelo looks at Deegan and he goes, "Who's Mark and Fred?" And then Deegan turns to Lieutenant Davis, Bob Davis. And he goes, "Who's Mark and Fred?" He says, "Well, they work for me. They were missing persons. They're our guys." "Oh, okay, they can stay." And we developed a good relationship, Dr. Hirsch and I, over the years. And God rest his soul, he passed not too long ago. He was another, I don't know if it was ever attributed to his injuries of the World Trade Center, but he was there in the thick of things when the collapses happened. But anyway, they brought this third body up, and me and Mark look at each other and says, they were missing one person off of the manifest, and they thought they found him. And he says, "Well, that ain't the person." They says, "Well, how can you tell?" I says, "Because that person's been in the water for a long time." That is not the person.
Wow.
And the chief of D's is looking like, "How are you making a call like that?" And he says, "Yeah, that. Just like that." He goes, "Wow, this is before Dr. Hirsch got there." So what happened was the person that they were looking for, when they took him from the plane and brought him onto the tarmac, he walked out of the airport, got in the cab, and went back to his apartment. So he was he was maybe in shock. I don't know, but
maybe
the body that they brought up, scuba was in the water, and they found the body that was floating around, and they brought it up. So it was a floater that was recovered before it floated entirely up. So that's from Flight 5050. I was there for that. I was there for Happy Land Social Club fire in
1990. Yeah.
And I worked Sunday through Thursday. That was my days that I used to work on missing persons. And I remember I got a phone call from the chief of D's wheel about I was getting ready to leave to go into Manhattan to the 30th Street, the office of chief medical examiner, and my shift started at 6:30 in the morning. So I want to say it was about 4:30. I get a phone call that I had to report up to Southern Boulevard. There was 18 DOA at a fire. I said, all right. So I drive up Southern Boulevard. I get there, and there's a lot of bodies laying, out on the sidewalk. And, when I first arrived there was like maybe 50, 100 people behind the barricades. And I'm looking around, and I says, we got to cover these bodies up. We can't just leave these bodies like this, So, the EMS crews started getting all the sheets that they could give us, and we started covering the bodies up. And then I says, okay, so I counted. I says, oh, all right, there's 15 here. I says, the other 3 have to be inside. And one of the firemen looked at me and he goes, what do you mean the other 3? He goes, you haven't been inside yet. I says, no. He says, no, it's not 3. And I went inside, and it was 87 bodies. Well, a total of 87 bodies. And these 4 people went to a social club that Saturday night to have a good time. And, being with the reputation in 1990 in the Bronx on Southern Boulevard, you're going to come up with machine guns, kilos of cocaine, everything, all the contraband that you better have enough vouchers for this. When we searched all 87 individuals for their personal property, I recovered the only 2 pieces of contraband there were. It was a personal little amount of cocaine and a butterfly knife, if you wanted to call it a switchblade or a butterfly knife or whatever. Those were the only 2. This was a tragedy that struck a community. This was their weekend out. And one of the tragedies there was one family that was celebrating a birthday. So there had to be 8 or 9 family members dead celebrating someone's birthday. All because of one of the psychopath Cubans that was released in the flotilla in 1990. No, yeah, I guess he was dating the hat check girl, and then she realized that he was nuts and tried to break it off. So and this is before I got to Arson and Explosion Squad. Even though we were in the same division, they were there too, doing their thing. I want to say, I forget who went. Billy Ryan knows better than me on this one. He wasn't there either, but I know Billy has one of those vacuum minds also. He remembers things. I think it was Billy Mondor was one of the detectives. They actually canvassed the gas station, and the attendant ID'd this guy as a guy that went and picked up out of the garbage antifreeze container, put $1 worth of gas, and that's what he used to carry the gasoline back there. So $1 worth of gas killed 87 people, you know. And what came out of that whole ordeal was that the landlord got locked up, and I believe convicted for chaining the back door. These poor people, if they had a back egress, they would have survived. And unfortunately, there was 2 back rooms. The men chose to try to break through the wall of one of the rooms to go to the next store. And this is on the 2nd floor. So, you know, there was no windows to get out in the front or the back because they were all barred. So they started breaking through the sheetrock, and they ran into a concrete block wall. If they would have went to the other room, there was no concrete partition there. It was just sheetrock on both sides of the wall. They could have just went through, and it would have bought them enough time, maybe not to be overcome by smoke, because most of the people that died of smoke inhalation.
Right.
So that's that time. One of the things that came out of that, Jack Hackett should be given credit for it. It was probably one of the models, one of the steps that we used in the World Trade Center. The powers that be wanted to use a public school 2 blocks away from Happy Lands as a temporary morgue. They wanted us to take all 87 bodies and bring them over to the gymnasium in this school. And Jack Hackett said, if you do that, you will be tearing down the school within 2 years, because the community is just not going to want to have that school, their kids go to that school anymore, that there was 87 bodies there. So his idea was for us to take photographs at the scene and send our detectives at the school, set them up on tables, and let people who think they were missing a relative go there and view the Polaroid pictures. In the meantime, we took all 87 bodies and transported them down to the office of the chief ME's office. And another thing that came to mind was, what if we don't have enough refrigeration down at the ME's office to handle 87 remains? And the chief ME, Dr. Hirsch, said we will, and if not, I think it was his medical investigators that said we could get a refrigerator truck if we need to. That came into play at the World Trade Center
in 2001.
So those couple of key things we actually did use during the World Trade Center. I'll talk about that later. But
of course,
I was there during that period of time. A couple of kidnappings, because missing persons is part of the Special Investigations Division. So you have, arson and explosion. You had special frauds, major case. At the time, Safe, Truck, and Loft was still in existence. Joint Bank Robbery Task Force, missing persons, of course. Joint Bank Robbery Task Force. So we had, a number of squads in there. And major case was always dealt with the task of kidnapping. If a kidnapping took place, major case would take the lead on it. And with kidnappings, typically, especially back then, a lot of them had to do with drug dealers, drug wars going on. You needed a lot of personnel. So they used to have to reach out to the other squads and have people fly in and cover, observation points, and we're talking days for days. Used to pack a go bag because you may be out there and working right through 12 hours into 24 hours if you had to, depending on what was going on with the kidnapping. So I was able to get that under my belt too while I was in that stint of major case, in missing persons, doing some kidnappings with major case. And then I got promoted, and I went to the 107 first. I believe I was the last group that also, typically, a sergeant, when he got promoted, went to a command, stayed in that command for about 6 months, and then they transferred him to another command, sometimes in the same division or in the same borough. So I went to Queens, and the 107, which I grew up in the 109, so the 107 was the next adjoining precinct. I knew my uncle used to work in the 107 as a housing cop. He says, "Oh, that's the land of dinosaurs." All the old timers. Well, it really wasn't all that, because there were few and far between dinosaurs around when I got promoted in '91. A lot of guys already jumped ship and retired. You had guys that had 15 years on, or a little bit more, and then you had a few guys that had maybe 2 or 3 years on, and then in the 107 you had the meat and potatoes was anywhere from 4 to 12 years, something like that. So going in there, I realized Queens, I would have been very bored if I had to drive around in a radio car all day, because there was, in the 107, it was a pretty quiet command most of the time. You had a lot of schools. That was the only difficult time was usually dismissal time at these schools. You had, I think, 7 high schools. I forget how many middle schools and grammar schools, but you had all these high schools, and that always generated radio calls to cover. But I went there. One of the notable things when I was working there was there was a radio car with 2 cops. One cop was a seasoned cop from East New York. He asked for a transfer to get to the 107. I think, his name is Jerry Price. Jerry must have had about 8 or 9 years on a job. So he had more time on the job than I did. And he had a partner. He took a partner on, Frank Tama, I believe. And Frank had about 2 years on the job. And they made a great team. I love working with them. They were good guys. And all of a sudden over the radio, I hear, hey Sarge, come around the block. Meet me on Parsons. So I meet him on Parsons, and he's looking down this one of the avenues. I believe it was 72nd Avenue, something like that, in Queens, right off of Parsons. And he points to these 2 guys, and they're standing on the front steps of this house, and they're banging on the door, pretty adamantly to get in. And with Jerry and Frank was this lady who was terrified because it was her house. And she came home and she sees these 2 guys at her front door banging on it. So she just drove. She knew that they were on Parsons Boulevard Park with their radio car. So she just went around the block to them and said, "There's 2 guys." She told them what she saw, and they took a peek. They saw it, and so they wanted some backup because they figured these guys, something's wrong. So we get there, and it was 2 Hispanic guys, and the next thing I know, they were holding a cardboard box, and they shove it to me, and they says, "Yours." And it was $63,000 in cash, 10s and 20s. And they were looking to make a drop. It was all drug money, and they they picked the wrong house. The house next door was the safe house, according to Queens Narcotics. But we took him back to the station house, and this is when Internal Affairs Division was still in play, not the Bureau. You call them up, and you say, listen, they just tried to bribe me. You know, you did everything by the numbers. I told Jerry, I says, Jerry and Frank, you get the credit for a bribery collar, you know? And Internal Affairs, well, I don't know. I don't know if we're going to take this. We'll send out the inspection unit. I said, what do you? Anyway, we had to get assistance from inspections to wire up one of the cops who could speak Spanish and make them make a formal statement saying that they wanted us to take the money and that they could get us more. And I had to delay this, and I used a thing. I says, the Capitano, I says, I told the translator, the Capitano, he's still in the building. He would want a lot more. We wait for him to go home, and then we don't want that much. So, you know, this and you get us a little bit more. We're happy. Good. We'll do that. And they got this all on tape and everything. It was a good bribery collar. So,
it's good undercover work. I gotta say that's hilarious to me because I'm picturing that in my head. It's like, hey, Poppy, you want the 70? You want the 63,000, Poppy? You know, here you go. But you know, a good thing criminals are stupid sometimes.
Yeah,
and
they're not rocket scientists. That's for sure.
Some of them are, unfortunately, and they just don't use their intelligence for the right things. But some of them are just plain dumb. And it's funny you mentioned Flight 5050, just to digress back to that, because I mentioned my friend Mike Milner in the chat earlier, who was a long-time fireman with Rescue 4 in Queens. He got a medal because he made a great rescue there. There was a woman in the back of that plane, and he crawled to the back of that plane and got her out alive. So I'm sure he remembers that job quite well. And shout out to you, Mike, in the chat. So, I mean, it's interesting. It's an interesting evolution for you as a sergeant because, like I said, first you were a cop in IAB. Then you had that great stint in Queens, and you have that interesting collar you just mentioned. Then you were a sergeant in IAB. And all of it kind of ties hand in hand with going to A&E in 97. So here is a unit that, as Billy Ryan once said to me, we don't do the what, we do the who. The bomb squad does the what. The bomb squad figures out the forensics of what went into a bomb. You guys, your job, one of them at least, is to find the predator who put it there in the first place. What attracted you to A&E?
Well, like I said, we were in the same division. So when I went back as a sergeant to missing persons, I became the XO there. And I was working evening shifts, and Jerry Sheen was the lieutenant at A&E. And John Santos was the sergeant. Now, John came to A&E, I want to say, the same time I came to missing persons. So John got promoted to sergeant. He went out on patrol. John was one of those blessed ones. He didn't do any IAB time. He went to A&E because he had special qualifications.
He was in the bomb squad.
He was in the bomb squad. He was a tunnel, he was in the engineers in Vietnam. He did a tour as a tunnel rat there. So, he shouldn't be in IAB. He should be doing what he does best. He taught me everything there is about explosives, and I'll get into that. But I'm in missing persons, and I had a good relationship with Jerry Sheen. A matter of fact, he knew I was a funeral director. And I remember this one day when I was there. He grabs me. He goes, Fred, come in here. Take a look at this. These guys from New Jersey want me to look at these crime scene photos from 3 years ago. And, I can't explain what this is. They think that this is a homicide case. And here's some autopsy pictures. And there's an autopsy picture that I'm looking at. And he goes, what did they shove down this woman's throat? And I says, they didn't shove anything down her throat. That's a trachea. I says that when they split, because the trachea is your airway that goes into your lungs, and it looks like there's ribs in it. There's lines in it. When an ME does an autopsy, they split open that to see if there's anything in the trachea, and that's what they were looking at. So all of a sudden, it just clicked in his head that, oh, you could tell that off of that photo. I said, yeah, and that's what that is. That's a trachea, and I says it looks pretty clean. So I says there's no soot in it. So the person was dead before the fire. So as soon as I said that, he looked at me, thanks. And the two detectives from New Jersey couldn't thank him enough. And in '97, I was getting where I wanted. I did as much as I wanted to do with missing persons. I did a lot of nice things there, but I felt like I wanted to change. So I was looking for a spot to go to in the division, and I went to the division CO at the time, who wasn't a big fan of mine, and I wasn't a big fan of his. Pretty one-way kind of guy. He wasn't giving me any spots that I knew he had room for. And then I had told him, I says, well, I didn't want to. I says, well, I'd like a transfer, and if you can't accommodate me, I'll understand. But you'll understand that I'll look for a transfer then. So I was going to go to a number squad, and I didn't want to upset anything. This was 1997, and I was home on vacation because I had a vacation coming up, and it was I guess it was the day before St. Patty's Day. Mm. My phone rings, and it's Jerry Sheen. And he says to me, he says, listen, when you coming back to the office? I says, well, next week. He goes, good. He goes, I heard you were interested in leaving missing persons. Would you come work over here? And I says, really? I didn't know you had an opening. He says, no, there's going to be an opening. I says, John isn't transferring. He didn't tell me that. He goes, no. John's staying. He goes, I'll have another spot for another sergeant. I says, well, I'm very flattered. I says, but I know nothing about fires other than you close the book of matches before you light it. And that's it. I'm not one of these fire guys, volunteers from Long Island or anything like that. He goes, nah, he started laughing. He goes, anything you need to know about fires, either I'll teach you or you'll go to one of the schools and you'll learn it. And he goes, it's a piece of cake. He goes, I need a strong supervisor that knows investigations. So I says, sure. When he goes, well, when you coming back? I says, no. I'll be there tomorrow. And he goes, but you're not coming back until next week. I says, no, I know how it works around here. I'm not sitting at that desk. Someone else is going to be sitting at it. So he started laughing, like my enthusiasm. I was there on St. Patty's Day. I literally moved all my personal stuff out of my missing persons office, which was on the other side of the wall of my new office. So it was one of those steel partition walls separating me from my new office. It was a little smaller, but I could put up with it a little smaller. And I stayed there for 8 years. It was a great move on my part. He wasn't kidding. He showed me a lot. Jerry Sheen, I owe him a lot of gratitude. He showed me how to investigate fires. Then he sent me to schools. I got some of the best training that you could ever ask for. I had better training than some of the fire marshals. I went to the State Fire Academy to get my fire investigative level 1 certificate, but then Jerry sent me to the National Fire Academy for my level 2, and that's a 2-week course down in Emmitsburg, Maryland. And a lot of our fire marshals, they never get an opportunity like that, and that was a very good course. And then I also, because Arson and Explosion, we had a joint arson task force with ATF, and they ran a school in Fleetsea down in Glencoe, Georgia, for arson for profit. So I did that school too. So I did 2 schools almost back to back. I did the New York State one and then the one down in Glencoe, Georgia, a few weeks later. I had all this training like right at my fingertips right away, and it did give me a good insight of what I should be doing when I was out at a scene. And again, like what he said, holds true. And whenever I interviewed a detective that wanted to come and work there, if they said anything like I said, that I don't know anything about a fire, that didn't scare me, because I told them, I'm looking at your investigative skills. How do you close cases? That's one of the things. I want to know that you know how to close a case. As far as learning about fires, we'll teach you. And fire science is, not that complicated. It is a science, so there are certain things that you could depend on at every circumstance, and the guys I worked with were very good, talented. Again, there was some that weren't volunteer firemen, and there were others that were, and they brought more to the table with them. Especially, we couldn't even get budgeted for like some equipment to go into fire scenes. So Eddie Schaffberg comes in and he brought in like Oceanside's old turnout gear or something, and he handed it out to the guys. We got fire boots to go in instead of ruining our shoes all the time. Billy Ryan didn't like to dirty his shoes up that much.
Yeah, not surprised.
He shows the picture of him in a jumpsuit, but he was a suit and tie guy along with Billy Mondor. Those guys they like to keep clean, but he got himself dirty enough, Billy, more than Billy Mondor ever did. But we were a suit and tie squad. That was another thing, and that holds true too. If guys came there with the attitude that, we can dress casual, we're going into dirty scenes. Oh, no. We're suit and tie. When you go and interview people, here's a typical thing. One time we had to go into one of the housing projects on a weekend, so it was a call-in. We didn't have enough personnel to cover weekends, so they would reach out to one of the supervisors. The detective Wheel would call up one of us, and then we would have to respond with some detectives and work the case. So I get to this project, and some of the young people that were there, they saw the guys from like anti-crime, and they're in dungarees and t-shirts and stuff like that. When the guys in the suits, 5-0 is here now, and when you grab them and you talk to them, they were expecting like we would have. We had that magic wand. We're going to make you talk one way or another. You're going to be answering questions, and I have to say this: when you dress the part, it works. And I'll tell you one thing that I staged purposely because of the way the guy dressed. A guy just got transferred in. I think it was his first day or second day there, Billy Wagner. And I knew Billy casually because he was a former Midtown South detective, but he wasn't there when I worked there. He was a 17 precinct cop. But Billy was a very fashionable guy. Billy Wagner, he dressed to the nines. I mean, there wasn't a crease out of place. His hair was always done nice. And we were investigating a guy who was found with an inert grenade. And he said, though, that there was more. He thought it was really a live IAD. But now we were trying to find out where he had more of these things. So he wasn't really cooperating with us. And I had Billy stand right outside the interview room. And at the given moment, have the door swing open with me telling the guy that, well, I can't do anything for you. So the feds are taking over since it's a grenade. And he looked like an FBI agent just standing there. He just looked like an agent standing there. The guy just, I'll tell you where the rest of them are. And he gave a right. So
that works.
It worked. You have the guy dressed in a suit and tie. It works. You have a guy dressed in a blazer with patches on her elbows. and no tie, just an open collared shirt, and you don't get the same results, maybe.
No, definitely not. And the thing about your time, and we're talking with Sergeant Fred Manzolillo, this is volume 21 of Tales from the Boom Room Profiles of the NYPD's Arson Explosion Squad, is that in A&E, it's not just about, the fires, the suspicious fires, that is. You don't go to normal fires. The FDNY handles that. The fire marshals to do an investigation. They'll determine if it's suspicious or not, but it's also the fireworks seizures. It's also, as you said, sometimes I remember reading a story in the New York Times archive from 1995. A drug dealer had 13 hand grenades on him. He handled that. There's the coordination with the marshals. There's the anatomy of the arson investigation. But as far as before a bomb goes off and after a bomb goes off, like I said, the bomb squad's going to handle the forensic part. Once they and crime scene get you what you need, sometimes it's terrorism. Sometimes, like I said, it could be gangsters trying to get back at each other. What's the anatomy of a post-blast investigation from the arson and explosion standpoint?
Okay, well, I can't give up too many technical things.
No, don't do that. Don't do that. Yeah,
but
the basics.
I did. I attended the large vehicle bomb course that the FBI does at Vandenberg Air Force Base, where they actually set off a 500-pound info bomb, as what happened in Oklahoma City that we remembered earlier in the show. It's the same.
And the Trade Center.
And the Trade Center too. What it replicated was 500 pounds of this info in drums in a van, and there was a tractor trailer truck that was next to it, and the target vehicle was an SUV, and this thing detonated. And I wasn't in the military. I was standing in a concrete building 4 miles away when they detonated, and the lights shook. So to really appreciate the force of that type of an explosion, you're like, holy God, man, could you imagine this like in a confined area? This is in an open area where they blew it up. Well, when you do a post-examination of the scene, most of the people that were attending this course were bomb techs. And truthfully, I think if myself and probably there was 1 or 2 FBI agents there, we were really the only investigators. Everyone else is a tech. They know what they're doing specifically to put together looking for bomb pieces. And I attended ATF's small package bomb school once or twice in Coles Neck, New Jersey, Earl's Naval Station, where they detonate a 5-pound bomb, and we put that back together, and that's usually in a confined space. So you're looking for certain elements that components that when put together make the bomb. And my partner John Santos, he gave me a rundown what I should be looking for when I'm looking at these things. And you need the container that it was in. You need what type of an explosive was in it. You need the ring system for the detonation, the timer or the mechanism that actually detonates it. You're looking for all these things. To give you an idea, there was a component from that 500-pound bomb that was found. I found it 800 feet from the bomb site, and it was about 1.5 inches piece. But that's how far out you really have to go in searching to get all you can, because that one piece could have the serial number or some evidence that's going to lead you to who made the bomb. And whoever made the bomb, then that will lead you to who set the bomb. It should lead you to it. And everyone gets caught up, especially in the, investigating fires or motives. But first you should tackle, the how it was done. And then you get to the why part. You know, motives they could kind of give you tunnel vision sometimes. You get too caught up in motivation instead of like just being open-minded and saying it could come from a whole different avenue that you weren't looking at because you were so focused on that one thing that was right there in front of you. It was too blatant. You're saying, oh, it has to be this. And quite frankly, a lot of times it's not. You know, one of those cases, we had a fella on a Sunday morning come out of his house in Borough Park. He went to his minivan. He went to get in his minivan, and someone had placed a bag of garbage where the driver's door was. Even though it was a Sunday, there was a bag of garbage there. With his leg, he went to kick it away so he could open up the car door and get in. And when he kicked it, it blew his leg off. And that was Eddie Schaffberg's case. Billy Ryan helped out a lot on that case. But I was still assigned to the World Trade Center recovery. I was still at the ME's office and the site for another couple of weeks. But I remember telling the guys, you know, if you need me, reach out to me. So I gave my thought. You know, this man, his background, he was in business, and he owed the landlord where his business was like 150 grand. I said, that's a good motivator. You know, that is a good motive. I says, but
greed kills.
You know, but he, you know, the guy who had his leg blown off, he had that business early on where he did home theaters, the whole systems and stuff, and he had a number of people that could be pissed off at him, you know. So they were looking at that too and everything. Well, I always was going back to the landlord, and I could tell you this: I asked this guy when I came back to A&E from my assignment at the morgue, and I came back. I went to the hospital. I was talking to him with Eddie Schaffberg, and I brought it up about his landlord. Even though Eddie brought it up, everyone else, Mark Torrey brought it up. He was the lieutenant at the time. And they were saying, no, he cleared that guy. You're wasting your time with that. But I asked him. And he says, no. I cleared that all up with him. I have an understanding. We you know, he would never do this to me. He loves me. I love him. I guess it was like 5 years. I guess in 2006, he got locked up. First of all, surprise. Yeah, because nothing like a scorned woman, his wife gave him up. He pissed her off because he ran to China, hid out in China, so the clock stops on the statute of limitations. So you didn't have to worry about 5 years now. But apparently when he was over there, he created a whole nother family. So he comes back and now I'm retired now when they take him down. I guess it was 2005 when he got locked up, the latter part of 2005. And I'm laughing. And John Santos and I think it was Kevin Pratt, they gave me a call and they were laughing. They said, you were right. You were right. She gave him up. And then, he's out on bail. And they call me up and they tell me, you're never going to believe what this guy did. But apparently his ex-wife, now living near you, he found out where she was with family, and he was on the way up to blow her up. He made more bombs, and he got tired, and he went to a rest stop on the thruway, on New England Thruway, and he fell asleep. And one of the state troopers doing a check through there was walking around, and he sees pipe bombs laying on the back seat. So like you said, they're not rocket scientists.
No, they're not. Jesus, I mean, that would be quite the stop. Sir, you want to do something about those bombs back there? But, I do want to, and we'll hit on a couple more things. And this has been a great conversation with you, and I've enjoyed hearing these stories, as has the audience. When you got to A&E in March of 97, you almost got tested. No, not almost. You did get tested right away, because 4 months later is when Paul and Richie have that job out in Brooklyn, where they get a call in the middle of the night. They go out there. Eddie Hayes was out there, too, who'll be on the show this Friday. And they ESU does the raid, and they find these guys with the pipe bombs, and Paul and Richie render them safe. Now, I never got the A&E side of it, and here you are, a brand spanking new sergeant, not on the job, but in that unit when these two guys stop what would have been the nation's first suicide bombing. What was A&E's role in the Brooklyn job back in '97?
Okay, so I can tell you, when you get tested like this. So Jerry Sheen just started vacation, and so did John Santos. They were both out of the office. And so
wow,
I was the only supervisor working. What happened was I get a phone call from the wheel. What happened? The perps were already at Kings County Hospital, and I had 4 detectives, so I sent 3 detectives to the scene, and then 1 detective to Kings County to meet me. I wanted to see if I could talk to these guys. And there was a night watch detective watching them in the emergency room. By the time I got there, 1 was already up in the operating suite, and the other one was being prepped to go up to the operating suite. And when you say, some of your funny moments on the job, well, I'm asking the detective, is there anything? He says, all he kept on asking for what time it was. He wanted to know what time. He must have asked it 100 times. So I'm thinking in my head, there may be another device out there on a timer, or another team, another cell that was going to go do something also. This could be a coordinated thing. So I get that information back to where it needed to go. I knew right away that really, more than likely, this wasn't going to be an A&E case, that this was going to go to the Joint Terrorist Task Force, because they were in our division at the time. They were in our division as well. They were a sister squad. So a lot of times, jobs like this, we both are there working the case together, so they say, because you got the feds involved. And then all of a sudden, they'll make a decision which way it's going to go. And wherever the chips lie, you're stuck with what's ever in the paper there, So as I'm trying to question this guy, a young doctor, probably a resident, was telling me that I couldn't question the patient, that she's there to save a life. And I says, well, so am I. And I says, I am. And I want you to keep him alive, as long as it takes for him to tell me what's so important about 9 o'clock. He's asking if it's 9 o'clock. And our argument got a little vocal. And there was an old-time nurse there who saw what was going on, and she grabbed this young doctor and spirited her away and said, we need you over here. This patient has a severe wound. And the nurse looked over my shoulder and just gave me the nod. Like, go ahead, go and ask your questions. There was an anesthesiologist that was there that was ready to prep this guy. And he goes, in 30 seconds, you could ask him anything you want. I asked him. So these 2 guys actually came over. They were from, they were part of Hamas.
Yeah, they're Palestine guys.
Yeah, they were Palestinians. They just got there. And one of the things I guess one of the guys may have discussed was on the vest. Very fortunate for the ESU guys that went into that apartment and took them down, was that they put 4 safety switches on the vest.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy's hand, when it swiped down, because he tried to actually detonate it, his hand came down and only 2 of the toggles were hit. If the other 2 would have been hit also, the bomb would have went off and killed everyone in that room.
Because I remember reading that in Seven Shots. There's a great book on it, Seven Shots by Jennifer Hunt, I believe is her name. And they talked about it. And the team that night was Joe Dolan. On that team was Joe Dolan, who later went out to the bomb squad himself a few years later, and Davey Martinez, who retired out of Intel. They were the first two through the door. I'm going to have those guys on the show back in the summertime, along with Paul and Richie, and maybe Oberdeer, too, to do a deep dive into that job, because Oberdeer was there as well. And they reached for it. And to clean up the language a little bit, I think it was Joe that said, "What the bleep you doing?" And then they had no choice. They had to shoot him because otherwise they were going to blow it up. But it's funny because Paul and Richie were outside hearing this, and Richie runs in, and Richie turns to one of the E-cops and he says, "Who do I get to shoot?" You know, it's like, they're like, no, we already took care of that. And they have to go up there because I remember Yurku telling me, he's like, they said, "Bomb squad forthwith, bomb squad get in here." He turned to Richie, he said, "Uh-oh." But they got the job done, and they did great. So, one more thing I wanted to ask you about is, and it kind of blends together before we get to the concluding segment, is you were at the morgue, as you said, a lot after 9/11. That day was very personal for everybody. I mean, you probably knew quite a few of the ESU guys. You knew Danny Richards. We were talking about him off the air. And after that, you have a few more years before you hit 20. So that come down period from after the site's been cleaned up and most of these bodies have been recovered. I mean, even if you had been working in the funeral business your entire life before becoming a cop, that's not an easy thing to see. That's not an easy thing to deal with. What helped you, and what has helped you kind of stay centered upstairs and not let that take away your joy from having to still do the job, which you still had 3 years minimum left to do before you can get your pension?
Well, first of all, I enjoyed the job. I did enjoy the job, and I enjoyed coming in, knowing that every day there's a chance that some catastrophe like this could happen. We discussed this in some of the discussions that we had. Trying to disaster plan.
Right.
We run these drills, and there's a reason why we run them. Is because we like to be prepared. NYPD is probably one of the best drilled agencies in the world. People come here from all over the place to observe us because we do it so well. And, I never appreciated until I retired how well oiled the machine is. When I left the job and I went into it was an offshoot of the funeral business, but a friend of mine owned a casket company. And he asked me to run the casket company, to be the general manager. He only had 20 employees, and he did like $8 million worth of business. Small little family operation in Queens, and I mean, we're lifelong friends, and he trusted me to do this. And I'm looking, I says, he didn't even have like a work schedule filled out for the following week, or even for that week. There was just like, it's too iffy. Like, what drivers can you depend on being here tomorrow morning to get all these caskets out of here and all these vaults and all this stuff? So I said, this can never happen in a police department. We got to pick things months in advance. You gotta put you got to put down a schedule here. You got to have some rules. You got to have some organization. So I started doing that for him, and then I was like a fish out of water being in that end of the business. I went back into just being a funeral director at one of my friends' places. But working with the people that I worked with over the years, I worked with a lot of talented people. I named a few of them tonight, and I know I'm missing so many more. I have the guys that came in after 9/11 that filled the slots of guys that left, and Mike Cummings, Ray Marino. I had guy Robert Dewhurst, Eric Wuss, those guys. But Andy Cohen came in, and some of the guys that I interviewed when they applied, and I left before they got to work there. I got to speak to over the years, and they stayed there. They loved it. That's one of the things about A&E. You are a family. We always keep in contact. The same group of guys that over my tenure there, we're always connected. Always, right. we kid each other. If one guy, God forbid, they start the text group before 8 o'clock in the morning, you get the whistle blown on you. Last night I sent out a text. It was 11:30. I got the whistle blown a lot on me. We keep up, contact with people. I try to keep up, especially around 9/11. On that date, I was fortunate that I was in a division that we didn't lose anybody. It was a miracle because I mobilized. I was the senior supervisor when it happened, working. So Tommy Monahan was in missing major case. He just went back there from getting a cup of coffee from us, and he told me a plane hit the World Trade Center. And I says, "What do you mean, plane? A big plane, a little plane?" He goes, "A effing plane, a big jet." And I says, "Okay." I told one of my guys, make sure you call up the chief of D's wheel. I told him to go back and get a hold of his CO, was Captain Duke. God bless him. He was a character and a half. That's a guy you'll never get on the show, but talk about a treasure trove of stories he could tell you. He's a great guy, George Duke. We mobilized the division. We set up. I was set with the task of trying to find a temporary morgue, a suitable location, and they were thinking that there was going to be bodies all over the place. We were setting up detectives up on rooftops to look at the other roofs of the lower buildings, because since the jumpers from the World Trade Center may have been coming down, God forbid someone was alive and we didn't get to them. I had a blessing in disguise. I was walking down Vesey Street, and Father Judge was walking with me. And I knew Father Judge because his parish was St. Francis of Assisi, and he was the fire department chaplain. And my best friend that I grew up with, and God bless Sal, he died, still active duty, not that day though. But he was assigned to Truck 24 across the street from St. Francis. So he was good friends with, Father Michael Judge. So I knew Father, from Sal. And as I'm walking with them, he was going down to the fire command post. And I had to stop short because I saw the police department tow trucks coming onto Vesey Street to start towing vehicles off of there. And you couldn't tow anything because there were body parts laying in the street on top of cars. There were parts of the building, parts of the plane that were laying there. The buildings didn't collapse yet. This is just a fire scene at the moment. So this was a crime scene. And I told the tow truck driver, I don't care who gave you that order, you can't do this. And there happened to be a chief that was there. And when I say the name, a lot of guys are going to start chuckling. But Chief Hegarty, James Hegarty, 3,000 miles I came to supervise, and supervise I will. There was a lot of guys that didn't like this guy. And I knew him when he first got promoted to captain. He was a shoe fly in Manhattan when I was a cop there. And I always got along with this guy. He was a good guy. He sees me talking to this tow truck driver who's actually telling me, you can't tell me that. The chief told me to take this. I says, well, you go back. Which chief is it? I said, but you're not touching any of these trucks. And it wasn't Hegarty. But Hegarty comes walking over and he goes, what? He goes, Fred, what's the matter? I says, they want to tow these trucks. He goes, they can't tow these. They want to tow these cars. He goes, they can't do that. I says, I'm telling them you can't do that. So he goes, no, you can't do that. You go back to wherever you said, Chief Hegarty said you can't do this. I told him I was going to go back and tell Chief Ali what was going on, because I'm certain whatever was going on Vesey Street was that happening on Liberty Street. It was happening all over the place, that they're going to start towing cars, and there's potential evidence that's going to get towed away or destroyed. So when I told Ali, he says, we can't, go down there, assess it, and tell them not to be doing it. I said, all right. And that's when I was walking through the plaza, and I was standing by the Globe when the South Tower came down. So I only made it to the bottom of the steps between buildings 4 and 5 when I started getting hit with the debris. There was an engine truck there. There was a few civilians that was standing looking straight up like deer in headlight. And I put them towards the back of the truck, and I just blocked them with my body against the back of the truck. And when I felt the truck jump in the air, I figured we were dead. I figured that was it. Because I couldn't breathe. The cloud that came down had so much heat in it that the first breath you took literally seared the inside of your lungs a lot. I mean, it was burning. And then it was an eerie calm. It was an unbelievable calm. And I knew exactly where I was. I couldn't see 2 feet in front of me. But I knew exactly where I was, and I was going to get these people to downtown Beekman Hospital. And I started walking them there. There was an ATF agent from our Queens office that she started walking in to the cloud, because she wasn't there during the collapse, but she saw me, and she comes running over and saying, Sarge, you okay? And she had a towel, and I'm wiping my face, trying to get the stuff out of my eyes. And I told her, we got to get out of here. This stuff is poisonous. We got to get out of here. And we took about one step, and she grabbed me and she said, what do you mean it's poisonous? I says, all this concrete stuff, asbestos, this is all in the air. You can't breathe this in. We got to get out of here. She didn't tell anyone other than her husband. And her husband I knew because he was a supervisor in ATF as well. They just found out she was pregnant. So now I had 4 people to the hospital. I got her to the hospital. I got them to the hospital. I had called one of the detectives that worked out of our Queens office was Mike Rooney. Mike Rooney, I knew he knew the husband. I says, get in touch with him, tell him where she is, and then come into the city and meet me, at such and such a location, which I thought I was going to be at. But lo and behold, I go back out and the second building falls down. So naturally, that location didn't exist anymore. so Mike did find me, though, and he helped me, find my way around because I couldn't see a freaking thing for a while. And, it was a very solemn 6 months that I was assigned to the pile. People that were there at the beginning, we call it the pile, not the pit, because it was about 4 stories worth of debris. I'm very proud of the guys in A&E because we did what we could with the limited amount of equipment that we had and the knowledge that we had, and we were, we went up to the top of that pile and we were loading up buckets, looking for anything, any evidence of people, belongings to people. When the warning bell, when the horn rang, another danger event of a building collapse or glass falling, there was nowhere to hide when you're on top of that pile. You couldn't run down the pile. You couldn't get away. The Deutsche Bank, they were thinking that was going to collapse on us. All we could do is just tuck and hide underneath some steel girder while we were in that pile. But those guys, they worked the pile for 50 days straight. They did tremendous work while they were there. John Santos was with them. I got assigned up at the morgue. I was throwing a hissy fit to my XO because I wanted to be there with my guys, not up at the morgue. And I could come down, and that's what I was doing. I was coming down and meeting them after I set up things on 30th Street, doing what I was supposed to be doing there. I would go down, see what was going on, and then I go back to 30th Street and finish up there. So, but I think we went well over your time period.
That's fine. As I often say, if the guest is doing most of the talking, that means it's a good show. The show may have my name on it, and for those of you that have followed the show a long time, you know what I'm about to say. The show may have my name on it, but it's not about me. Whoever the guest is on a particular episode, it's his or her hour upon the stage, or more than that, So I didn't want to interrupt you at all because you're telling great stories. So it was my goal to let you just run, as it is with all my guests, and you did. And I do have a couple of questions in the chat from some viewers. The first, and I'll get to them both in order right now. The first one comes from Alicia B, a very loyal viewer of the show. She just wants to know, were mom and baby okay? Do you know? The ATF agent who was pregnant.
I don't want to say anything. It's not my place, but as long as I won't say their name. Unfortunately, no, she lost the baby.
Oh, that's terrible.
But the good news is, a couple of years later, they had a child. And I lost track of the agent because she transferred out of the New York office. So I don't know what ever happened, but I do know that she was able to have a family later on, but she did lose that baby, though.
Another question comes from Stuart Kelso, another loyal viewer. He says, great show. Thank you, Stu. A question for the sergeant. With a tremendous career, are there any regrets?
Mixed emotions about when I left at 20. A lot of the guys that I worked with, they thought I was going to be a 30-year man at least. I had a great job. I mean, it was a pressure job. Most squad guys, they go home at the end of their tour and they don't worry about the job until the next tour. Guys in a squad like mine, they used to call me up. There was no off-duty time. I mean, God, if you were on vacation and it was important enough, you were getting a phone call. And as I was told, if you can't do that, no hard feelings. We'll find someone that can. But I liked it. I liked working with the guys. I really did. It was a small detective squad that did probably the toughest investigations. Everyone thinks, homicide gets all the glory because it's a homicide, but probably the toughest investigations to conduct are arsons and bombs.
Because a lot of the time the evidence goes up in smoke, literally.
Well, and you need a trained investigator that could actually find that evidence. Whatever goes in smoke comes back down in ash. So you'll be able to find it. But there's telltale signs. One of the things I had the pleasure of doing, and one of my highlights is that I used to give the lectures at the criminal investigation course, the CIC course for new detectives, as well as the homicide investigation course. And I did it for 2 different periods. One when I was in missing persons and one when I was in arson and explosion. And first of all, I found it a tremendous advantage getting it out there to the detectives that we were even there as arson and explosion. People like yourself, you probably were confused that we were bomb squad. No, we're not bomb squad. We're arson and explosion. Matter of fact, when you look in the department directory, we come before bomb. We come arson.
Yep, alphabet. That's true. Kevin Barry sent me a directory recently, and it has all the phone. And thank you, Kevin, because it's a big help. It has all the phone numbers for the different units, and you guys are at the top of the list. You're right.
So a lot of detectives, guys that had time on a job, arson and explosion. Who are you guys?
Yeah.
You never well, and a prime example is why you got A&E involved in jobs is in the Rockaways. We had a fire that we weren't involved in. It happened on a weekend. The precinct detective never called us in, even though there was a DOA at the fire, and we should have been called in for that to help them out. Even though the DOA, the way it works, the DOA is the responsibility of the numbered squad, the precinct squad. We're there just as an assist. So even if there's a homicide, the collar is going to go to the detective and the squad. But we give them all the assistance. So my guys do this unselfishly. They don't get that blue 5 that says they get the clearance on it. They just do a lot of pink 5s and hand it over to that detective and help him build his case. they may get called in and even testify, my guys, more than the detective in the case, because they know more about what happened than that detective did. So my guys did a great job. I'm so proud of them. And we had a great clearance rate. We doubled the national average percent-wise in our closures. So, you know, what a great group of guys and gals. I mean, the case in the Rockaway, when we finally get a call, because what happened is that the fire marshal went to the medical examiner's office in Queens, and he was talking to the doctor, and I don't know why it was said or if it was miscommunicated, but the medical examiner was insisting that we needed further police investigation on this because the girl may have died from a gang initiation ritual. And I'm shaking my head like, what? And I needed to know what they were talking about. So I knew the doctor. I knew the ME. I says, what do you, I actually went to her office and I said, why, what is leading you to this? Well, it was pointed out by the fire marshal that there was markings on her abdominal area that indicate that she may have been involved in some sort of gang. And they do initiations where they have to mark themselves. I says, and that's what you're basing this on? I said, okay. So I says, by the way, what's the origin and cause of the fire? Why don't we start with that? Is it an intentional fire or an accidental fire? Because if it's intentional, then we have a homicide. And we know that, the police department does that investigation. But if it's an accidental fire, then it's an accident. And we don't have to do any further investigation. The person died because of the fire. So anyway, we're involved in the case now. I get a call from the CO of the 100 squad, who I knew, and he goes, help me out here. I can't get, if I go to CompStat with another Cuppy case, circumstances under pending police investigation. And Cuppies is a detective's worst nightmare in his squad. They never go away. So anyway, I had the guys track down the first engine company. They call it the first due, fire department language.
Yep. Heard of that.
Interview all those guys, the first EMS at the scene and everything. And we find out where this girl was found, apparently in her panic to get out, there was one of those oscillating fans that was turning, one of those that turn tabletop ones, the small. Mm-hmm. And, usually the face of that, it comes in half to protect the blade. Yep. So apparently half of that fell on the floor and this girl landed on it, belly down, while it was superheated. So it did scorch her, it did leave the pattern. But the fireman and the EMS guy who took her out of there knew about it, but yet that was never, that information was never given to the ME properly. So now we went from a Cuppy case, and to tell you the truth, it had to go a little bit further than that. The ME still wasn't quite convinced that could be the issue of why she had markings. I actually requested a meeting with Dr. Hirsch with the ME. And I took the case folder and the crime scene photos and the ME's photos, and we laid them out on the table. And like I said, Dr. Hirsch, very learned man, with his smoking his pipe in his office, looking at it like this. He hated to do it. He never, and he said it to me privately afterwards. He says, I hate when I have to correct one of my doctors in front of other people, but she was wrong. She was wrong. And he told her to amend the certificate that it was the cause of the fire was an accident It was not a homicide. Therefore, it's a closed case. Person died related to the fire. And that's what. And I kept on insisting that. I says, why are you saying that this is gang-related initiation if it's an accidental fire? We're saying it's an accidental fire, and she just couldn't grasp that, But anyway, that's why you have people in A&E who are trained in knowing how to do these investigations, because that poor detective in the 100 precinct, he'd be scratching his head all day. He may not know, the ins and outs of what goes on with these investigations, as well as a guy from A&E. So all of a sudden, I could tell you this: if someone was burning their barbecue, that squad gave us a call. If there was a flare up on the barbecue, call A&E up. They know what to do. So.
And it goes back to something that, excuse me, that Jim Carano told me when I asked him about A&E. And Jim said they're a unit we can't do without. We don't have time to do the investigations because it takes the bomb tech out of the city. So that's where we call them in. And without them, there's no us. We work hand in hand. So to his point, and there's a funny story before I get to the concluding segment that Don Sadawi told me off the air. And that he was saying that jokingly, if a guy from A&E said he was in the bomb squad, he'd go to the wall that the bomb squad has with the history of all their members. If it was usually a lady that called up, and I guess the guy was trying to impress, and he'd say, no, he ain't in the bomb squad. He's in Arson Explosion. So you guys, but I love the camaraderie that exists between the two squads, because Carano's right. There can't be one without the other. So honestly, it's been almost 2 hours, but it hasn't been a tedious 2 hours at all. It's flown by. I feel like we just started, and I've enjoyed it immensely. And I have to bring you back for a part 2 sometime, because I don't think we covered everything. So, but for now, we end part 1 with the rapid fire, and that is the 5 hit and run questions from me and the 5 answers from you. And I'm sure you're ready. I'm sure you're raring to go. So I'll get right into it. And you can say pass if you want. And the reason that I say that is because
let me just find the sheet.
No problem. No problem. Ready?
I wrote, yeah. Go ahead.
All right, there you go. So the first is, and this is why I say you can say pass in the event that the story may not be G-rated. What is the funniest call you ever responded to?
In Midtown South with my partner, Charlie Talamo. We responded there during a day tour. It was a large dispute. There was a bunch of women in a hallway, and this one gal, she was a big girl, and she literally had the leg of a dining room table as a club, and she was after this little scrawny little crackhead girl, chasing her around, and I mean, there was 4 cops there, and we didn't want to have to do anything to hurt this lady. We just wanted to drop the club. Let's calm everyone down, get everyone out of the hallway, like we try to do. And, she wasn't having anything. She wasn't calming down this lady with this club. And I thought, well, man, this is going to get ugly real quick. And Charlie reaches into his duty jacket pocket that he remembered from when he put it away in the springtime, that he had this thing in his pocket because it was the first day we were wearing them. It was the mouthpiece of a telephone. And he held it out in front of this girl and says, and she was cursing us up and down. She was cursing at the girl, using all these curse words and everything. And he goes, I'm warning you right now. Everything you're saying is being recorded, and we got to play it to the judge. And all of a sudden, here's Mighty Joe Young that stops dead in her tracks and looks at the microphone and says, Your Honor, you got to understand, that bitch owes me money. Just like you had 3 of us on the floor now laughing our butts off because, I mean, who would ever think of something like that? But that's Charlie. He used to make me laugh every day. Thinking of little things like that to this day is just one of those funny things.
Second favorite cop show or cop movie?
Well, I go to the Barney Miller because that's always how I, thought that a detective squad should be working. It's the funniest people. They're the greatest detectives and the best comedians because some of the things that they do, you just can't top it. It's just unbelievable.
Third most uplifting call you ever responded to?
In my NSU days, I was fish out of water. I was going to court to testify, so they put me on a day tour, and it was about a little bit before noon outside of Macy's. I was just about to take the train to go downtown, and someone came over to me and said that there was a man that was having a heart attack, and I actually brought him back to life. And in those days, in 1986, the ambulance from St. Vincent's Hospital took about 20 minutes to get there. So I was doing CPR. I was doing the blowing and the compressions for like over 20 minutes. And I went into the cab of the bus, and I went down to St. Vincent's Hospital. I found some piece of paper in this guy's pocket when they were searching him, the hospital security searching him, and I grabbed the piece of paper. It had the phone number. It was a letterhead. I called that company up, and this gentleman just came from them. He was a former employee. He went there to visit them, and they knew exactly who he was, and they gave me his family's names to call. And I called up the family. I notified them. Well, about 2 months later, I'm on patrol, still in NSU, and we get one of those, it's never good when it's like a 10-2 forthwith. 10-2 forthwith means come back to the station house. And the field training officer that I was with that night and the two other cops were all looking at each other like, uh-oh, like, what's going on, that they're going to, reassign us someplace, or it just was bad. And when we get there, we walk in, and then also we find, the FTO goes in and says, let me go find out what's happening. He comes back out. He goes, you guys stay here. He goes, Fred, you come. The lieutenant wants to see you, but it's good. He goes, don't. It's a good thing. I walk into the office, and there's the lieutenant, and there's a couple sitting across from him. And he goes, Fred, he goes, Officer Manzolillo, these people came in here looking for you because they want to thank you. And they stood up, and it was the daughter of that man. And she said that the doctors said that if I didn't do the CPR, he would have died out in the street. He did eventually die like 6 weeks later, but she had 6 weeks with him more. And that's what she said to me. And it meant a lot, But then the lieutenant, who I said was a jokester right from the beginning, he was a great guy, Lieutenant McDonald. He was having a kick out of this because he wanted them to tell me how they tracked me down, because the hospital only had my shield number. Well, apparently the son-in-law plays golf with former chief of detectives, Nick Castro, once a month. So he calls up the chief. He says, all I got is this cop's shield number. What can I do? He goes, give me the number. He calls him back in 5 minutes and says, he's assigned to NSU 3.
Small world.
Yeah, so Lieutenant McDonald goes to the FTO. He says, you might as well take your shield off and give it to him, because he's going to get one now. Which I didn't. I got an EPD for it, though. But it made me, that was very uplifting and gratifying that I never, you come on a job knowing that they train you for it. I tried to help people all my life, but I never was put in that position. But that was the first time I was, and I did. And it felt very, very rewarding,
Fourth,
a family out.
Oh, absolutely. Fourth favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
I got to give up points now. No. Well, I go back to the two original bars that when I came out in that issue 3, we used to frequent O'Reilly's on 32nd Street, 31st Street in Manhattan, off of Broadway and 6th Avenue, and Twins. Twins was technically not in the precinct, Midtown South confines. It was actually in the 10th precinct confines. although it was literally a block and a half away from our command, and our cars were parked. We could keep our cars parked at our command and just walk to the bar. So you didn't have to even look for parking. So when I retired, the guys gave me a retirement party at Twins, and all the years going there, one of the guys that came to my retirement party was Billy Mondor, and I know Billy Mondor since the day I walked in through Midtown South doors, because he was assigned there, and he actually occupied the seat in my radio car that I wound up in, and lo and behold, we were working together in A&E now, but now he retired. He's at my party, and he goes, "Hey, did you ever know there was an upstairs to this place?" I says, "No, all these years." And Billy was there like every night. So he goes, "I never knew there was an upstairs." So Twins and O'Reilly's.
And fifth and finally, if you can grab any of these young guys or gals coming on the job now, given the experiences you had in 20 years, and you had a full plate, as I like to often say about my guests from the PD or the FD, what would you tell a young guy or gal coming on the job right now?
Well, unfortunately, it's a much different job. And my advice is that if you have nothing to worry about, if you use the golden rule, okay, and always have in the back of your mind, because of technology now, everyone is videoing, everyone is recording, and people get segments of it, and they put you on trial right in the public square, as we could call this now, be it Twitter, Facebook, whatever the podcast, whatever venue it is, something that we didn't have to put up with so much. At least you had an opportunity to do the jobs. It's always not, it's not, I'm not saying it's lily white, that you can't get your hands dirty. There is a limit of what you could do, and understandable, and being reasonable. But what I saw over the last 2 or 3 years, it's tough for me to even say, it's a great job, because I saw how our administration through the de Blasio years, and now even with the current administration, they're not going to have your backs. They're not. So you just got to be mindful, do your job, stay safe, remember the guy next to you on either side, and go home to your families. Go home to your families. Help the good people. There are a lot of still good people out in the city. Some advice that was given to me when I first came on a job is you're not Superman. You can't change everything. You're going to have about 10 square feet around you that you're going to control. And I found out working on the Deuce, 6 at night until 2 in the morning, it was less than that. If you could maintain control of 5 feet around you, you had a good night. So for all these young guys, God bless you, and good luck with the job. I hope you stay safe during your career. Remember, it's a career. Your family comes first.
This has been a blast. Like I said, the 2 hours flew by. It doesn't even feel like it's been that long, honestly, because it just flowed really well. I'm going to shout out to the audience in a second. Don't sign off yet. We'll say goodbye off the air. But before we go, besides the guys you shouted out tonight, any other shout outs to anyone or anything you want to give?
Well, I just want to tell Jerry, I think I beat him by a half an hour, because he's on for 90 minutes.
Yeah, you did.
And one of the things that Chief Quinlan, when I retired, one of the things he said he was going to miss so much was that he used to call me when he started driving home from headquarters, and where he lived in the right on the borderline of Nassau County. Mm-hmm. He used to call me up so I could keep him awake, because I could talk to him for the whole ride home. I'm not one for not telling a story.
No, I saw that tonight, but again, I enjoyed it. Some people tell a story, but the way they tell it lulls you to sleep. Not on a podcast, just in general. That wasn't you. You told a great story. The guests stayed engaged as well. I know I was. And we have to absolutely, and we will sometime down the road, whenever I can get a schedule and get a date and we can line everything up, you'll be back for a part 2. Because I think we only hit the surface tonight. You were a great guest. I want to shout out to the friends in the live chat. As always, Billy Ryan's tuning in tonight. He says great guest, so he made it. You saw Jerry Kane earlier. He's here. Joe Maliga, Peter Pranzo, Raquel Pranzo. Peter retired from Street Crime, of course, and supervised Billy for a little bit. Billy was working under Pete for about a year. Steve Ozer, he's here. He's a retired lieutenant as well. Stu Kelsall from England across the pond. He's tuning in tonight. Howard Blank, retired Taru guy. Hopefully I can get Howard on the show sometime. Trying to make sure I don't miss anybody. Ruth Ann Griffin, she's here too. So, like I said, it is Boom Room Week on the Mike the New Haven podcast. Sergeant Manzolillo was first tonight, and on Friday we will have Eddie Hayes. Eddie was in emergency service, and he just had to flex on everybody after, as if being an E-cop wasn't enough. He got to go into the bomb squad after it was done, and he didn't do just one stint in the bomb squad. He had to flex some more. He came back as a sergeant and did another stint in the bomb squad. So he had a cool career, and I'll speak to him this Friday for volume 22. Of Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's Arson Explosion and Bomb Squad. In the meantime, on behalf of retired Sergeant Fred Manzolillo, this has been volume 21 of Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's Arson Explosion and Bomb Squad. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Take care.